Hey guys.
Hey, buddy.
There you are.
Yeah. All right.
Just so you know, last time you had it till. So if I was watching.
Yeah, I know that because the light through better.
Just because I.
This is the good part about starting something without people knowing is that Paul talks to his girlfriend the whole time, and he can't hear us.
They fighting?
The Blue Man Group. The Blue Man Group. Boom, 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 boom. You gotta play the drums and.
I'm not that talented.
How are you guys doing today?
Good, and y'all?
So good. Thriving out here on the Oregon coast.
Thriving.
That's a self-fulfilling prophecy right there, Lucas.
All right, Paul, one of us is going to have to lose this hat.
I can put on a different one. Brian and I were wearing the same one the other day. All right, I'll switch.
Yeah, I like it.
I was gonna wear my "Make Muskie Eat Again" hat, but I think on a webcam, it kind of looks it looks like I'm wearing a Trump hat.
Oh my God.
It's a really great hat, though. Yeah. You guys are back at the beach house.
We're at the Steelhead Lodge.
Yeah, we just move stuff around for more comfortable setting.
Got it.
The couch has its back to the windows and the bay, and the way the sun is, you would be able to see us.
Got it.
So we just moved the couch. It's no big deal.
That's commitment right there. I like that.
Conservation from the couch, man.
That's it. You got to get this right.
I'm gonna put the couch over
Hey,
there.
look, you guys, we're rule followers, Justin and I. So
That's good.
I know.
Because
I'm
it
in a chair. It's really not very cool that I'm in a chair. I never.
No,
even
you've
thought
messed
about
it all
that.
up.
I got
hey,
it.
Bennett, hey, Bennett, now that you brought it up, I feel it's an appropriate time to talk to you about your background.
What about it?
Well, I think you need to step it up a notch.
I've got the Millennium Falcon. You want to see that?
Yes.
I mean, I thought this was from the couch, no?
I know. I'm gonna have to use my laptop and actually sit on the couch for the last one, for sure.
I have been on the same couch in the same spot with the same shirt for all of these. So
Yeah, are you
That's
just wearing
my
the
level.
same shirt? What's going
yeah,
on?
I watched it today.
Nice.
I feel like it's my uniform.
Classic.
Yeah, I like it. I like that commitment, Lucas. I noticed that too. And,
That's what I do. That's what I do.
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
Well, that way, if I decide on the fourth one not to show up, I'll just put in any of the other episodes, and people will be like, "Oh, that's him. He's there."
Being
Very-
awfully quiet today.
Hey, have you guys let Shane in? Oh, there he is. Hi,
Yeah,
Shane.
there he is.
We didn't want to, but we did.
Shane.
Yeah. What's everybody drinking?
I'm drinking some free beer.
Mark,
Good.
I need to step up my game. I'll be right back.
I've been on several calls with Shane in the last week, and I'm really used to his background, and I like it, Shane.
Yeah, it's one of those pre-made ones. This really isn't my house.
Nice.
Oh, I went to that site, Ranch Backgrounds.
Yeah, ranch.
Yeah, it's a really good one. I gotta get one of those.
It was very specific. He's like, "I want something with exposed beam. I need it to. This is what I'm looking for."
The old cabin look.
Ben, what do you got going on there, Ben? You changed it up.
Yeah, I'm sitting outside tonight.
Wow.
He's abandoned the couch.
Outside.
Outside.
Chase has got the old Chuck Reagan poster, man. That's a
Right.
classic.
I
Love
had
that.
to pull it off the wall just for this, man.
Yeah, that's a good one. Really good one. I have mine in a tube somewhere.
Beside our wedding present.
That's right, which is also in a tube. I'm going to find that thing. I'm going to actually get up from the chair during this thing. I'm going to go find it. I'm going to hold it up because it's pretty awesome. It's like,
Yeah, it looks so cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, you know, Dave and Dylan were in on it too. So I orchestrated it, but they contributed. So I'm not the only guy on that one. So yeah.
So should we get going?
Yeah,
Yes.
let's go. I'm
All
game.
right.
Let's go.
Well, welcome to our third episode of Conservation from the Couch, brought to you by the American Fly Fishing Trade Association and my good friend Brian Bennett from Moldy Chum. And also thanks to all of the supporters, and I'm going to list them off: Mid-Current, Rio, Orbis, 12 Weight, The Drake, Merger Strategies, Sims Fishing Products, Road Drift Boats, Cheeky Reels, Hatch Magazine, Flywater Travel, Reddington, Fish Pond, Scott, Fly Rods, Thomas & Thomas Fly Rods, the Fiberglass Manifesto, High Street Strategies, Allen Fly Fishing, Yellow Dog Fly Fishing Adventures, Patagonia, The Sustainable Angler, Ginking Gasoline, Rep Your Water, Umpqua, Nautilus, and Sage. And I don't think I missed anybody this time.
Yeah, Scientific Anglers.
I said Scientific Anglers, didn't I?
Nope, missed it.
Oh, and Scientific Anglers.
That's it. Got on.
What we should say is brought to you by the fly fishing industry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Scientific Anglers was a late ad, like literally yesterday. So pretty awesome that they reached out and said, hey, we really want to be, like, we want to help support, like, please. So we threw them on there yesterday.
Yeah, the last couple have been really good, I think, personally.
Yeah, this one's going to be.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so everybody can see the gallery view.
There we are. I've gotten so used to this view.
Right.
Us too.
So a couple just housekeeping items here for those of you who are attendees. You can see us, we can't see you, which maybe is a good thing. But at the bottom, if you want to ask questions, there's a chat box, and there's also a question and answer box as well. So either of those, and myself and Brian will be fielding those questions as we go on. So Brian, you want to add anything?
Yeah, listen, this one hits home. It's my backyard, and all my friends are here. And so I'm super excited about it. Just
Not all your friends. You have other friends besides us, but just some of your
all
friends.
my friends.
But we
We
are
got all
your
of them.
friends.
This is everybody.
And also, hey, Brian, by the way, it says your name is Paul.
And you spelled my last name wrong too. Also, it's spelled wrong on mine as well. So thanks, Ben. But
Yeah, because I didn't have the link to this one, and so Paul sent me the link, so that's why it's saying it's me. So the two
Well,
Pauls.
you can click on it. How do I spell your name, Paul? How do I spell your last name wrong?
Moinester. You missed the E.
Paul Monster.
Yeah.
Yeah. that's
There you
it.
go.
Yeah, I'm late to the Steelhead game. I moved to Seattle in like 2002, and so I'm kind of a rookie, but there's something super special about these fish, and I think that's kind of what the goal of this particular session is. I mean, there's a lot of issues around Steelhead, as you're going to hear, but the goal of Conservation on the Couch was to kind of build a thread amongst anglers across varying regions and varying species. And I think we're going to accomplish that tonight, but I'm definitely one of those people that was really impacted when I moved here and began to actually chase steelhead, and particularly when I began to chase steelhead on the fly. And I've been fortunate enough to do that with some of the people on this webinar. And so I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm excited to kind of share what makes these fish so special, and hopefully motivate some others out there to get involved and take action on helping us protect them. So, I think, Paul, you're gonna kind of give us a quick little thumbnail on the agenda for tonight.
Yeah, no, appreciate it, Brian. And for those of you who haven't attended these in the past, we're excited to have you all here. And one of the things, we do these events, somewhat regularly in the Pacific Northwest or down in the Gulf where Lucas is. And, it's a downside for sure of coronavirus for us not to all be in the same room together. But at the same time, it's pretty neat to be able to have people from all across the country being able to tune in and to have a conversation that might otherwise be pretty localized. And so, hopefully over the course of the evening tonight, you guys learn a lot about what's going on with Steelhead and the Pacific Northwest. But also more importantly, you recognize the connective threads that, connect to these fisheries. And so like Brian, I live in the Seattle area. I'm late to the Steelhead game, much later than Brian, but I actually learned about Steelhead and the Wild Steelhead Coalition from Brian Bennett and Moldy Chum back in the day, and that's when I fell in love with Steelhead. And I moved to Washington over 5 years ago, in large part because of Steelhead, because of my desire to fish for them, but also my desire to help protect them, and just recognizing the really complex issues that go into Steelhead conservation. It's a super dynamic ecosystem. It's a really dynamic management system. And yeah, we're going to get into all of that today. But before we do, I'd love for folks to go around the horn and introduce themselves. And we'll start, I guess, with Chase, if you don't mind, but also if you wouldn't mind just giving a quick overview of the Wild Steelhead Coalition as well, who's our partner for this event tonight.
Yeah, sure, Paul. Thanks for having us on. And maybe I'll just start with the WSC. So the Wild Steelhead Coalition is a nonprofit dedicated to increasing the returns of wild steelhead to the waters of the West Coast. Sounds pretty simple on paper, but that is a huge mandate, a really broad mission, and there's a lot of strategy and programs and campaigns that go into it. There's of any of the groups that I've worked with, and I work full-time in the conservation world, the WSC is maybe the epitome of grassroots conservation. I mean, it's a dozen guys around a table with pizza and beer, a couple contractors supporting us that really have done a lot over the last 20 years. And our track record for a group that's pretty much all volunteers, I think, has been really impressive. Based here in the Seattle area, but doing work up and down the West Coast into Oregon, California, Alaska, and BC as well. I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more later, but that's the high level overview. Yeah, my name's Chase Gunnell. I've been a WSC board member since early 2014, I think, is Bennett, when you and I had lunch and started talking to Rich Sims and Jonathan Stump and some of the other guys that were involved with the board at that time. Just wrapped up my second 3-year term and glad to be a part of this crew and everything that we're doing for Washington state fish. And I think that ties a little bit into my background. So I grew up here in the Pacific Northwest, lucky to come from a family of really diehard hunters and anglers. I remember going down to the Cowlitz River when I was maybe 4 feet tall and getting my ass just handed to me by a big chrome buck steelhead that spit my corky and yarn. And it's one of those things you just don't forget. You know, I've really put most of my time into the salt and into other fisheries as steelheading is such a challenge, but that challenge is also what brings me back to it. And then not only is it a challenge every single day you go to the river, but there's such a rich culture and community around steelhead fishing. And I think that's embodied by some of the passion around conservation in the Pacific Northwest as well. And I guess I should add some of my day jobs. I work for a group called Conservation Northwest. We're the Washington affiliate of the National Wildlife Federation and do a lot of work on a variety of habitat, wildlife conservation, watershed restoration, and related stuff. And part of that is spend a bit of time down in our state capital as a lobbyist and consultant. And that's a lot of what I bring to the steelhead world, is that policy and campaigning background.
Awesome.
I want to note that I'm still barely taller than 4 feet, and so I don't know what you mean by that. Kidding, I'm 4.5 feet.
Awesome. Well, we can pitch it. Thanks, Chase. We can pitch it over to Kate and Justin. You want to go next?
I'm Kate Crump, and
I'm Justin Crump.
and we own Frigate Adventure Travel. We're fishing guides based on Oregon's north coast in the winter, and then we spend the summer months in Bristol Bay, Alaska, guiding anglers from all over the world.
Awesome.
Yeah, that covers
Justin, anything to add?
No. Kate's got it covered. You know, we've been here guiding on the Oregon coast now. This was our 10th season, and like I grew up just north of Seattle and grew up steelheading there. And I had a buddy that had moved down here, and he said, "Hey man, why don't you come steelhead fishing and check this out?" And I came down, and I think in like one weekend I got more fish, like I encountered more fish in one weekend down here than I had in like 2 seasons fishing in the Puget Sound streams. And after that, I was like, I have to move to the Oregon coast, and that kind of set things into motion. So yeah, that's kind of the really short gist of it.
Awesome. Yeah, and then last but certainly not least, Mr. Shane Anderson.
Greetings. My name is Shane Anderson. I'm a filmmaker, owner of North Fork Studios, and director of storytelling and communications at Pacific Rivers Conservation Group outside of Portland. I live in Olympia, Washington. It's where I was born and raised, but I moved back about 5 years ago. I was a professional skier before Steelhead took over my life, or saved my life, I guess I should say. And kind of grew up in a steelheading family. My uncle's Kerry Burkheimer Fly Rods. He lived on the Washougal River, so as a kid, which was right next to the McMillans, and then right next to John Hazel. They all lived in a neighborhood on the Washougal River. So as a kid, I got to kind of see the spay movement and look off the bluff at the summer steelhead, and it always captivated me. And I'm thankful I was able to find the steelhead later in life, and it's changed my life. And now I make movies and try to save them.
Awesome. Hey, Paul, just one quick thing. John McMillan was originally going to be on the panel tonight. I wanted to let everybody know he's with Wild Steelhead United, which is the steelhead kind of chapter of Trout Unlimited nationally. And he, because of COVID, and we're going to talk about that in a second, he had to make some changes to his schedule and is unable to join us tonight. So just wanted to let everybody know that John's not going to be with us tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody, for.
Alive. He's still
He's
alive.
Still alive. Yeah, he's
Still alive.
He's fine.
John.
Yeah.
All right, Lucas, you want to go ahead and take it from here, bud?
Yeah, man. So as I've done for the last 2 episodes, I've always started off with sort of a funny story or something crazy that's been happening to me in my house. But tonight I want to do something a little different. I am about as far away from steelhead as you can get, sort of, in Louisiana. But I do have a steelhead story, and I think it's worth telling. So maybe 4 years ago, I went up to the Tillamook area of Oregon and was invited to fish up there for steelhead with my buddy Adam McNamara, who used to be the store manager of Orvis Tigard there in Oregon. And I don't know if you've ever seen a full body shot of me. Everybody kind of gets the couch version here of the, chest up, but the rest of me continues this way, and except for my legs, they're pretty small, like toothpicks. And so I always like to say that I'm sort of an overweight heron, and if I were to ski like Shane, I feel like if I went to get off the mountain, my legs would just snap and then I'd just fall over. So needless to say is that my center of gravity is not designed especially for wading, but I was told that wading for steelhead and swinging a fly was the way to do it. And so I was given some waders, and I show up morning of, overweight description, perfectly accurate. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Rob Parkins. Wow, that hurts a lot. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so I show up with my waders, and I'm fishing with Brian Mars, who is the fishing manager of the Orvis Tigard store. And we are on the Nehalem River. And first off, I want to tell you that I am scared of heights, and that driving through the Oregon coast along those bluffy things that y'all have was extremely terrifying to me. And I could almost not get into Brian's lap enough in order to get away from my side of the vehicle that I assumed, because of my overweight description, to tip the car into the ravine there. But I didn't, and so we made it. And I get out, and we're like getting on our gear, and Brian goes, "Where are your fleece pants?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Oh, you're gonna be cold." And I'm like, "It's like 60 degrees outside. It's not that big." But then he goes, "You're gonna be cold." And so I put on my waders, and I get down there, and sure enough, I get into the water, and I am freezing cold immediately, because as I found out the second day, those fleece pants make a huge difference. So now I am still overweight, still small-legged, but now frozen legs, standing in the river. I strip out a little bit of line on my spay rod, and then holding hands with Brian Mars, I'm not joking, he helps me wade to the spot that we're going to fish. So imagine me holding another grown man's hand, wobbling on very weak and frozen legs out to where we're going to fish. And I have been told that steelhead are called the fish of 1,000 casts. And so I'm expecting not to catch one. Well, in all my Cajun luck that apparently is something like Irish luck, I am dragging my fly behind me, waddling out to the spot, and I hook a steelhead without ever making a cast. So I want to say that y'all say it's hard to catch these fish, but I'm here to tell you that that's not true. That you can, if you're like a small toddler trying to, make your way through a Lego maze, which was me trying to get over those boulders, you can catch a steelhead without ever making a cast.
How many did you catch once you started making casts, Lucas?
None. I caught 0. For the next 4
Okay.
days, I caught no steelhead. So it was still the fish of 1,000 casts because I made another 1,000 after that. But so that is my funny story. I've been trying to keep up with the quarantine thing, but I've been unable to come up with any more funny stories. I think I've run out. So I thought I would tell y'all that steelhead story. I hope you appreciated it. It was definitely fun. I enjoyed the hell out of it, and seeing that place was awe-inspiring to me. I come from a very flat place in Louisiana where the highest spot's like 200 and something feet. And so having the ability to see those giant fir trees and all of the things that area offered that I had never seen before was amazing. And so even though I only caught one steelhead and it was by accident, if I'm going to be truthful, I enjoyed the heck out of it. And so on that, is there anybody that has their funny quarantine story? Because I still think we need one tonight if we can. So anybody who wants to talk about something crazy they've done from their couch, like me and the mozzarella, or something crazy you've done with a guitar, like making your wife break down, if you watched last week's episode, I'd be happy to hear it. Or if you've been getting texts.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, you must not have a silent on that phone, because every Zoom call I'm on with you, that thing goes off.
No, it comes from my computer.
Oh, even worse.
Yeah.
Shut that down.
I will say, and unfortunately, and I'm a little embarrassed by this, I have never gone steelhead fishing.
What?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Even
Hey,
I've gone steelhead
If you
fishing.
want to book a trip, we've got dates available.
Cable sales lady.
So I grew up in New England and love to saltwater fish. Still to this day, it's my passion. And I know that if I do it, I'm going to get hooked. Like, I know that it's going to be another one of those crazy passions that I have. But thus far in my life, if I'm traveling to go somewhere, because I've got to travel from Montana to go steelhead fishing, I'm traveling to go to sit on a flat skiff in my flip-flops.
Sure.
Well, as one person who doesn't, there's the dogs. There they are. As a person who doesn't steelhead fish, bring fleece pants to go under your waders. I'm just saying. No one told me that.
Oh, don't worry. I know you got to wear. I know that.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you get it. You stood in
I
the cold
live-
water
yeah,
before. Not
right.
me. And if I don't sink up to my thighs in mud, I don't know where I'm at.
Well,
That'd be a really interesting sight to see you sink up to mud in your thighs.
Oh, that's a story for the last episode, my friend.
goes
I've got
higher.
That
It
one
goes
too.
higher.
Yeah, I've got that story too.
Perfect.
well, if nobody has a quarantine story of ridiculousness, we'll just settle on Lucas's story of ridiculousness for catching his first steelhead and move into sort of, what we've all been kind of touching on to a degree, which is like, why do we love steelhead so much, and why are they worth protecting? So, just throwing it out to the group here, feel free to chime in about what is it about steelhead. If you've never fished for steelhead before, how do you explain to those folks like why these fish are so special and magical?
The places they take us, and not only taking us to these really magical places, but it's kind of like hunting for gold, or you get the what's around the next bend syndrome, and it's just kind of an adrenaline rush. It's a hunt, and it's the places they take you. And as my friend JD Love, who was a guide forever up on the Olympic Peninsula, told me at one point, without him, it's just kind of like living in a beautiful prison, when it's shut down.
Wow.
Yeah, that mystery that Shane's getting at, that hunting for gold factor is for sure for me. I mean, I spent a ton of time out in Puget Sound fishing salmon, lingcod, halibut, and there's days when I can tell you, 10 o'clock, we're going to get fish. 11 o'clock, we're going to get fish, just depending on the tides. Steelhead are a mystery, man. You go out in the OP, you could fish half a dozen rivers in a trip. You could get skunked. You could get 10 fish. You just never know when it's going to happen. And that mix of the huge, diverse set of beautiful places where they swim, from the high deserts to, you know, urban creeks to the rainforest, and just that never knowing, you know, this could be the swing where there's a 30-pound fish that comes after my fly. It keeps you on edge, keeps you coming back.
Yeah, I think steelhead are a lot like a number of the fish that people can get obsessed with. You know, like you can go and make casts to anything casually, but steelhead is definitely one thing that you can really dial in and dial in and dial in and dial in and just get to know the most microscopic nuance of something. And like you guys were saying, still not get them. But for me, it's that just knowing. Like what I love about steelheading is the process, and I love about digging into the river systems and getting to know them in more and more and more detail. I mean, that's what I love about guiding for steelhead. Is just like before we started guiding out here, you know, we'd come and fish when the conditions were ideal, or you know, when you had time, and then all of a sudden you're guiding and you're like, okay, well, you have a trip tomorrow and the water's high or the water's low, and it's like, okay, you know, at first you're just kind of trying to figure it out. And then as you continue on, you start to fill in the map, you know, like at first you have this like little map of what you understand. And then every day you just add to it. And then before you know it, like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 plus years into it, like under almost any circumstance, you can go, okay, well, they're going to probably be here. And I just love that you just keep learning.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I mean, the thing we had this conversation. There was like steelhead angling is that you're always hopeful. As anglers, we're hopeful. We go out, we're going to catch something.
Yeah.
And when you distill it down like that, swinging that fly through a run, it's that thing. Like, yeah, it's good. Like you're fishing it well. It's going to happen right now. Like you just feel it. But what the flip side of that is you're super hopeful and you have this great, you know, you always have that mentality that you're going to go out and you're going to catch a fish and you're still going to enjoy the day. But then you look at the challenges that we've got with steelhead, and it's like the complete opposite of that. You have this hopefulness, you have this feeling you're going to go out and you're going to be successful, but then you deal with kind of what the threats are to these fish, and it's like it's depressing because you always have that inherent hope. So maybe, Paul, that's a good segue to kind of talk about like what are the threats to some of these fish right now that we can kind of flush out. And we've got a couple of questions starting to pop in, so
yeah,
kind of go there.
Really quick, it looks like somebody on the chat just hit on another thing that I was thinking about, which is, you know, when you think about steelhead in the watersheds of the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest, I mean, they really are the canary in the coal mine. They're one of the most sensitive and anadromous fish due to their life history. And so, you know, one of the things we talk a lot about at WSC and as the steelhead community as a whole is, you know, what's good for steelhead is going to be good for Chinook salmon. It's going to be good for other species in this ecosystem. And it makes them so sensitive, but it also just adds this multi-layered dynamic to this fish that it's so much more than just a fish. It's the tip of the spear when it comes to the health of the Pacific Northwest. And I mean, you can't go out fishing for steelhead in a place like the Olympic Peninsula, the Oregon coast, and spend time doing that without realizing that every time you pull on this fish, you're pulling on all these other threads in the ecosystem around you. And that, I think that's another thing that brings people back to them.
So I want to ask a quick question, just because, you know, the other fish that we've talked about have a pretty similar life in that they are born in the saltwater, they live in the saltwater if you catch them in saltwater. Can somebody give me just a steelhead 101 about how does a steelhead's life go from start to finish? Because I mean, maybe a lot of people on this call know what that is, but I just think it's such an interesting life history that a lot of people tell me, like, what's the difference between a rainbow trout and a steelhead? And so maybe you could enlighten me.
Yeah, Shane, you want to chime in on that one, since you made the film Wild Reverence and the quintessential steelhead conservation film for anybody out there? We'll send that in the show notes, but yeah.
Suppose I could try to take a shot at it. I mean, I think what triggers, a steelhead is an ocean-going rainbow trout. What triggers it to go to the ocean? There's all kinds of different things. You know, probably the main thing is metabolism, and they are the most diverse of all the salmon species. You know, there's been steelhead that have been recorded to the age of 14 years old. You know, there's I think the most diverse steelhead in the world are those of Kamchatka Peninsula that have a tremendous amount of life histories. Speaking of life histories, I think that's what makes steelhead so unique and special to, the Northwest and the fishery here in the Northwest is you can go out pretty much year round, every month of the year, somewhere and find a steelhead around here, opposed to salmon that kind of come in spurts at different times of the year and die. And, steelhead are, you got the summers, you got the spring runs, you got fall runs and the winter runs, and they all overlap and they adapt to the different habitat we have in the Northwest. Dr. Dave Montgomery at UW, stated once in one of his books that like the salmon and the steelhead, they co-evolved to the landscape in the Northwest at the same time these mountains were coming up from the sea. So each one of these different populations and genetic structures is literally adapted to its own watershed. You take a place like the Chehalis Basin here in Washington, and it's got, this real extreme amount of genetic diversity. I think there's 4 or 5 different, allele markers in genetics that differ from the different watersheds, and those fish are adapted to the particular parts in the basin, which is why it's so important to keep genetic integrity and not mix and mash all of these important adaptations that have taken 15 million years to adapt to that particular environment. What makes a winter steelhead from a summer steelhead? Well, they just found out in the last 5 years, there's actually an ancient gene called GREB1L, which differentiates the timing. And the same gene can be found in spring Chinook salmon versus fall Chinook salmon. So that's another thing we can't lose. We cannot lose the summer steelhead gene, because once it's lost, it's gone forever. A winter steelhead cannot become a summer steelhead, and a summer steelhead cannot become a winter steelhead genetically. So, these ancient life history diversities that have arisen with the landscape created this species that has occupied the West Coast all the way to the Pacific Rim to Kamchatka, Russia. And I think that's kind of one of the fascinating things, is they are so tied to the landscape and the river come from. That's what makes them unique. They can be anywhere from the size of a rainbow trout to, 40 pounds up in the Skeena system. So that's why I love them, and that's because they're diverse.
Yeah. And one of the thanks, Shane, that's a fantastic overview. And one of the things that, makes this so challenging too, from a management standpoint, is that diverse life history. And that creates a lot of unique challenges, in how we manage these fisheries. And so, I don't know if anybody, Chase or Kate, Justin, if anybody wants to touch on that, but, just as a point of all of this, the management of these fish is very complicated as a result of their complex life history.
Yeah, well, it's super complicated because depending on the system, I mean, we're talking about relatively small numbers of fish. We're talking about adult sustainable populations in creeks, up and down the Oregon coast that might be as few as 50 or 75 fish or 100 fish up to a few thousand, but we're not talking about populations of 20,000, so it's but meanwhile, they're super resilient and they can, handle a lot that we throw at them, not everything. But yeah, it's it makes managing them really, really challenging because of the way that they exist, because they're so unique.
I think it's important to point out too that they're often repeat spawners. So unlike salmon, they're not dying after they spawn. They might even return to the ocean, spend a year or two out there before returning back to the streams. And that's really special.
And then after they return on their second time, then they, and guys, you could probably correct me if I'm wrong, but they are more productive the second time around. So it's just a really interesting scenario where if a fish can spawn a second time, not only is it more productive in the system, it also is it has a natural resilience to ocean conditions. So like recently we've had some really, really warm ocean conditions. So the conditions for the out-migrating baby salmon and steelhead has not led to a lot of survival. So what we've seen here on the coast is not so much this year, but 2 years ago, we saw not very many young fish that have been out just for a year or two in the ocean, but we saw a lot of fish that had been out in the ocean for multiple years. And that could be just because that we have those repeat spawners are making it back in times when the babies aren't surviving as much, so there's just all these different things overlapping on making them successful.
It's interesting when you think about these diverse life histories, and then even the multiple races or runs in a given watershed. All of this, when you try to translate it into a management regime, not only is decades or centuries old management methods that we've used for other fisheries, ocean fisheries, groundfish, tuna, not only is that not applicable for steelhead management, but even salmon management, things that we've learned over the last century that have really taken up the bulk of management focus, research focus for salmon, is out the window when it comes to steelhead management. I mean, it's a totally different beast, from repeat spawning to the fact that there's just less of them to begin with, even in a healthy watershed. I mean, we are really, and I think a lot of the folks that are responsible for managing these fish will admit, and it's too bad we don't have John on tonight because he could speak to this really well, but we're often flying from the seat of our pants and learning from our mistakes as far as how to conserve and manage steelhead and steelhead fisheries. And that's something that's going to continue for decades to come and only become more complicated as we lose habitat and as climate change becomes a bigger factor. These are complicated fish, and managing them is really challenging.
Especially if you don't have any monitoring, right? Or you don't have consistent monitoring. That's something that we see here on the Oregon coast. The methods for how you check on the populations vary so much for the last 100 years that it's so difficult to have that consistency.
I think the repeat spawning factor is a huge issue that's been facing the recovery of wild steelhead here in the Northwest. I know that it's significantly dropped over the last 30 years. For example, like the Queets River on the Olympic Peninsula back in the early 80s, 50% of the run used to repeat spawn, which is huge. And now I think we're down to 15% is the latest statistics I heard. And, that can be from a number of things, from commercial harvest to just hooking too many, in the season, to a legacy of harvesting them through sport fish. So I think that's one of those components that management doesn't always take into consideration that they should, because the whole repeat spawning component is what makes these fish special. And that's why we have to handle them extra special when we release them, because that fish might have the opportunity to go back several different times in a lifetime and do the whole cycle all over, head all the way toward Hokkaido, Japan and back. And that's something we need to revere and treat them extra special.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Lucas, did you have something, bud?
Well, I just, as Paul said in the beginning of this, one of the things that we're really trying to do with these events is to, show while every fishery is unique in its own right, and that's what makes this country really special, is that we have so many different types of fisheries all in one country. There is a common denominator that tends to affect how these fisheries are faring. And I would have to say, and I'm a little ignorant, and so I hope somebody can lend a little bit to it, is that climate change has to be a major factor in how these fish are being affected. And climate change is something, as we are all on the same planet, is going to affect us all. And I say this every episode because I think it's important, is that we as fishermen have the opportunity to tell the rest of the country about what's happening to our planet through climate, because we see it firsthand. So can somebody sort of just, briefly touch on what climate is doing to these amazing fish? Climate change. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I think like here on the Oregon coast, we don't have the luxury that the Washington coast does, where most of our watersheds, at least here on the North Coast, are surrounded by private timberland. And then there is some state forest land, but it is land that is being managed for timber harvest. And we have some of the weakest timber regulations anywhere. Well, I think we do have the weakest timber regulations anywhere on the West Coast. And so what we end up with are really young trees. Our buffers have gotten, the distance of where you can clear cut next to a stream has gotten better over time, but we're talking about, in some places, the buffer is literally the width of one tree.
Yeah, it's one tree.
So, you know, we don't have glaciers and big mountains here. These are short, high gradient streams. And what these streams would have relied on in the summertime when it stops raining here are big trees to capture moisture, deposit that moisture into the ground, and then keep the water cool. And you would have had large canopy covering these things, and we don't have that anymore. And then
we would have had big wood in the rivers.
We would have had big wood. We would have had a lot of shade, and so now we're faced with, we have young trees, which granted they could eventually grow older if we increase our buffers, because with only a couple rows of trees, the likelihood of those to blow down is high, and those getting replaced will take a long time. And then we have the lower end of our systems. We don't have any habitat. It's farmland and stuff. But I mean, I think that's the combination of climate change and our loss of habitat is going to be really has been really detrimental to our whole ecosystem.
Yeah, that's right where I go as well. And I think maybe it's a little different in Washington, and I'd put British Columbia in this category as well, where we're sort of experiencing this earthquake and tsunami factor, where the last 50 years of population growth, I mean, Washington has been one of the fastest growing states in the country consistently over the last 2 decades. Seattle was the fastest growing metropolitan area for years. We're seeing this explosion of growth, particularly in the Puget Sound region, but up and down the I-5 corridor. That follows historic timber practices, dam building, culvert building, and all these things that are challenging fish. That's happening now. We're lucky that, there are definitely exceptions, the Columbia and Snake Basin, the Chehalis, where climate's having a bigger impact immediately. And Shane, I'm sure you could go into some of the detail on that. But we're having this huge impact that's sort of this earthquake to our wild fish of millions of more people coming to our region every decade. But coming down the road is this tsunami of climate change that's going to add a whole nother layer into our fisheries. Even if it's the Skagit River flowing out of the North Cascades, fairly cold and consistent, or some of the rivers in the lower BC mainland, they're going to be hit by that tsunami as well. And we got to deal with development and growth management and habitat restoration now, but we need to be incorporating climate planning into all of that.
I think the biggest immediate things we've seen in the last 5 years have had to do with climate impacts in the ocean, and these fish live 50% of their life or more in the ocean. And we've had these crazy warm water, really unproductive ocean cycles, at least for the last 5 years. And that's what a lot of people are saying is what's leading to some of the low runs and escapements that we're facing. And since we don't have control of that, really, I mean, that's completely out of our hands. That makes it even more important to protect what we can on the freshwater side and here on the habitats in our backyard. So setting aside thermal refuges and sanctuaries for these fish to be able to do their thing once they come home, because there's such an unknown out in that ocean. And we're seeing just whole different shifts of when the steelhead are showing up and when they're not, and spring seems to be coming earlier or later. I mean, every year is just so different. It's getting really hard to predict. And it's almost like we're seeing a biological change in the species like year to year because of all this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, Shane, it was a great point about, everybody great points, but in particular building on what you were talking about with regards to the ocean conditions, when you have these hotter, warmer summers too, where the conditions are rougher in the rivers and the water temperatures are lower and the water, the water temperatures are higher and the water levels are lower, it creates tougher spawning conditions and out-migrating conditions as well. And so when those two things, when that aligns with the ocean problems, you see returns like we had this year, where we had so many fisheries like the Skagit and others shut down. And, you can never blame climate change on one particular thing, but certainly those climate-like conditions are aggravating the fisheries and creating lower returns year after year. But
I like Jack's question about how do you talk about conservation issues with people who don't see conservation as a priority?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because that's one of the things that we heard on the first one as well was, how do you preach outside of the choir? Because, a lot of us in fly fishing are the choir. We are either turned into conservation-minded folks after experiencing, this sort of style and lifestyle of fishing, and then some of us were born into it. And so I think that's an awesome question, Jack, for sure. And it's one that I know people like myself and Chase and Paul spend sleepless nights trying to figure out, because the choir can only get you so far. And so trying to get people outside of that realm to believe in what you're saying is an important question. Now, something that I have found success in as a guide is when someone experiences something for the first time and they do it in a way that is as amazing as our fisheries give them the opportunity to do it, they come away a different person. They come away seeing it from a different perspective. And so, I'm all about the responsible growth of our industry. And so for me, I think some of the way that you get people is to have the contagious passion that we have. And so, for me, when I'm on the boat with somebody and I'm talking about Louisiana and I'm talking about habitat loss and land loss and all the things like climate that are affecting our fisheries, that passion is contagious. And so people who may not have thought that way when they came, damn sure think that way when they leave. And so for me personally, just to, answer it in my own way, is that it's about storytelling. It's about getting information to people through the eyes of a passionate person so that passion rubs off and they leave with that same sort of mindset. Obviously you're going to have people who are extremes in one side or the other, and you're going to have people who don't care what you have to say. But I haven't found a whole lot of folks who enjoy the world of fishing who can't at least be rational in conversation. Not saying it won't happen, but for me at least, and maybe I'm just extremely persuasive, but I know that it seems like it's possible.
Lucas, you're more the preacher, not the choir.
One of the biggest challenges with what you're laying out, Lucas, and I'm sure every steelheader on this call can probably relate to this, is the history and heritage of salmon and steelhead fishing in the Pacific Northwest is, at least in my eyes, it's different than any other fishery that I've experienced. I'll fish in Montana, fish in California, fish Alaska. It's really siloed. We as fly fishermen are one niche, and there are certainly niche, bridges between these silos. But when you've got swing guys arguing with nymphers who are then, just a fraction of the larger gear community, and even those gear communities are divided by basins, guys that fish Southwest Washington and the Oregon coast, guys that fish Grace Harbor, guys that fish the Olympic Peninsula, BC. One of the biggest challenges that face steelhead and salmon today is just the lack of unity in our community, not even getting out to the broader public, the people that might care about orca whales and through that would care about salmon and steelhead or casually interested. We're divided. We as anglers are divided and are jumping from topic to topic, and it can be really challenging to find a united voice to sing as a choir and then bring more folks into that community through that united voice. That's something we've been fighting on for years as a community, and I don't see it going away anytime soon, but there's definitely some signs of optimism.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and this is kind of one of my theories, and we did the striper session and the redfish session. Despite the threats to striped bass and to redfish, you can still get out and get after them. They're there. There's still a fair amount of fish. There's management issues the same, but steelhead is not the same way. We've already expressed there's not many of them. And that fish of 1,000 casts, it's like, steelhead aren't hard to catch. They're hard to find. And so, and I think that drive. And
sorry to jump in, but they're only hard to find because they're also at like 1 or 2% of their historic abundance.
Well, exactly. And so,
yeah.
And I think that Chase is talking about silos. And so we're fighting over, we all want a piece of that very limited resource, Like we can all rally around Pebble Mine and Bristol Bay because there's millions and millions of sockeye. So there's enough for everybody. We're here, we all get little pieces. And so, for me, and I'll speak to this, the question was, well, how do you get it to people that aren't steelhead fishermen or don't really care about it? I use the term, people have heard me use it a lot, it's charismatic megafauna. Like people are committed to pandas and polar bears and all that stuff, and they don't have a direct connection or experience with those animals. So to me, it's this kind of conversation where you express what makes them so special, why they're an indicator, whether, regionally and ultimately nationally and globally, that you can motivate people to take some kind of action, and whatever that is. But it's frustrating when you care about them, and you are preaching to the choir all the time, and you can't get other people to kind of go, hey, this is another important thing. And there's a lot of things that affect them, and we haven't even got into that. Like we could dedicate hours to habitat, to hatcheries, to harvest, to hydro, and now we just threw climate change into the mix. I mean, it is. I mean, my experience is it's the most complicated conservation challenge probably when it comes to fisheries anywhere. So, and sometimes you just want to kind of quit because it's frustrating. I can attest.
Brian, something that I think is, maybe crazy is not the right word, but something that I think kind of actually sometimes works against us as fly fishermen is that we're so focused on all the other aspects of a trip that when you talk about something being down 98% from its historical numbers, how in the hell aren't people like up in arms with what's going on? And some of it to me, and this is a Louisiana perspective, but some of it to me is that I think we have become so okay with catching one fish per trip that it's just a way that we're saying, okay, we're conservation minded, we're okay with this, it's not a big deal. But in reality, if you came to Louisiana and you told the speckled trout fishermen they were only going to catch one fish per trip, they would burn down the entire state to make sure that whoever was responsible for that went away and fixed it. And so I wonder if we as fly fishermen sometimes are too okay with the experience and too okay with justifying the fact that we're only catching a fish or two, and that sometimes we need to be a little more pissed. Like sometimes, and I'm not saying that y'all aren't pissed. I'm just saying that I'm listening to these things, and to me, it's like welling something up inside of me. It's like, who do I need to punch? Like, where do we need to go? Tell me, Chase. Like, where do we need to go to kick someone's ass? Because I would not be okay with that. Like Brian said, in Louisiana, we're blessed with, even though they're worse than they were, they're still better than anywhere else. And I'm mad. So like,
I think like the best way to get people that don't care about conservation issues, and to your point, Lucas, to say like to be upset, is to show them, like to take them onto our rivers, have them experience these beautiful places, and then also experience these massive clear cuts, experience how difficult it is to find a steelhead, and then have that conversation.
Yeah.
And hopefully fire them up.
Well, and it's shifting baselines, right? We all, I mean, the term is, I'm not going to, but to me, there's shifting baselines, and then there's the shifting recreational baseline. Like we as anglers are like, if I get that one fish, I go out for 3 days, and if I get one, I'm happy. It's like, what? Like really, you change your expectations, and I think that to some extent, and you look at, I mean, I live in social media. I mean, that's what I've been doing it since 2005. I see everything. And if you were to go through an Instagram feed, you'd think everything was hunky-dory on the Olympic Peninsula. I'm seeing beautiful fish posted all the time, and that maybe there should be a caveat there or all of that. But to some extent, it's like it can't be business as usual, I guess is what I'm saying. So, it's something that we're all passionate about, and how, Lucas, you convert that passion into action and the political will to actually do something about it. Because I've been here since 2002, and I'm involved. I've been on the board for I don't know how long, and I'm involved with all the conservation groups. And you look at the metrics, it's like, all the metrics say nobody's really doing a good job of this right now. But there are some, and I think we're going to get to this, and Shane can talk to this. I mean, these are very resilient fish. And if you look at the LWA and you look at other opportunities, like if you make it work, these fish will come back. And those stories are there. So like, you don't want it to be all doom and gloom either. So, but.
And part of the thing that's a challenge, Lucas, I mean, I was watching your redfish call the other night, and some of the things that folks were pointing to, land loss, habitat issues, overpressure, multiple user groups, there's no silver bullet when it comes to salmon and steelhead. And it sounds pretty familiar with some of the stuff you guys are dealing with down in the Gulf. You might want to go out and punch someone, but you're going to need a lot of punches. And I think people.
That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Trying to get a lot of punches. That's exactly what the point is right here.
No, it's death by 1,000 cuts, man. And folks like Brian have been working at this for decades. I mean, I think about my grandpa. He used to go catch 20-pound steelhead from his bike before going to work or before going to school. And that's just not the reality. I mean, this shifting baseline is a very real thing today, but it can burn you out working on this when there's just so many different things. I mean, it feels like whack-a-mole. But as Brian was just alluding to, I think there's definitely still some reason for optimism as well. I mean, we have not lost our chance to bring back steelhead to relative abundance in a modern sense. You know, you're never going to get them back to that historic abundance, but we have not lost the opportunity to at least turn this ship around a little bit. And it's going to take a lot of punches, a lot of different factors that need to be addressed. But, you know, there is still some opportunity there.
Well, I mean, there's that false narrative too, Chase. It's like somehow the fly fishermen, like we don't, like there's nothing more I would rather do than bring home a big steelhead and put it on my grill.
Oh,
Trust
totally.
me, you know? And so the opportunity to be able to go out and catch wild steelhead.
Springer, Bennett.
Well,
Springer, Bennett.
what's that?
Big Springer.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, you know, it's like, but you know, people are satisfied catching crappy fucking hatchery fish. Pardon me. I threw the F. I'm throwing the F.
You're the first one. Come on,
First
Bennett.
one, right.
Jesus.
It's like, really, you're satisfied with that? So, but here, I wanted to throw this out. David Conrad, who's a friend of Wild Steelhead Coalition and somebody I've met through my involvement, he has a question, and it was in reference to something that you said, Lucas. And his question is, if saving steelhead meant you could no longer fish for them, like, how does that change the whole discussion, right? Like, you look at that, and kind of my answer to that is, if we don't make some changes so we can fish through recovery, we're not going to be able to fish for it, because that's going to be dictated to us at some point. That if we let the trajectory continue, the feds are going to come in and somebody's going to come in and say, you're not fishing for them anymore. So,
well, and that's happened, right? I mean, we've got a great infographic, the Wild Steelhead Coalition, that we'll send around, but the number of rivers that are closed in the state this year, you know, outnumber the number of rivers that are open for fishing in Washington. But
you're right. Yeah. Yeah. And
so I'll let other folks answer that question, but just as a caveat to that. But if nobody has comments, I think it's actually a good chance to start, you know, like Bennett said, you know, these fish are super resilient. There are signs of hope. And I think a great sign of hope is highlighted by a recent film that Shane made. So Shane, I don't know if you want to talk about that film project and the Elwha.
Yeah. For that, I'd like to comment on the last thread, you know, like, how do you get the public to care? I don't know how you do that. I don't think it's possible. Oh, can you hear me still?
Yeah.
We got you.
Okay. That's what I'm saying. I mean, I really think it's up to the angling community to carry the torch on this one. I mean, we can try to keep telling these stories and getting the general public to care, but it's really up to us to like lead the conservation movement. I mean, if we want rivers open, if we want to catch more fish and have incredible is that take us to these magical places, we got to get off the couch and do something about it. And that's been really apparent. You know, we've been working on the Chehalis Dam issue for the last couple of years here in Washington. It's been really hard to get angler support in stopping a dam on for one steelhead producing stream. So if the anglers can't step up to help out to you know, stop these things or change the paradigm in management, then, you know, don't expect the general public to. So we all have a responsibility if we want to go out and fish. And then on the flip side, we got to tell stories that are positive so people have some hope. And there are a lot more stories out there that are positive because these are so damn resilient. They will come back if we give them a chance. You know, maybe we do have to have some rolling closures on different rivers instead of just shutting the whole damn thing down forever and walking away. Maybe it's like, oh, the hose getting beat up. Let's shut it down for 3 years, let it hold up, and then address management from there. And I think, yeah, Paul, going back to the Elwha, I mean, that was a huge wake-up call, you know, for me. It was something I'd been looking forward to my entire life, those dams coming out, and to see the resurgence of wild steelhead come back and the resident rainbow trout re-express anadromy and reawaken that anadromy life history gave me all the more hope that in essentially 4 years since the the blockage was removed at that Upper Glines Canyon Dam, we were seeing the numbers that we saw this last year. I mean, it was unprecedented, you know, and that's from a number of different things. It's from awesome habitat, super productive headwaters with a lot of food, no fishing, you know, since the dams have come out. So these fish have had the opportunity to come back. And that means it's going to be really important when it does open to fishing that we're going in with a really light touch, so we don't, you know, set back this recovery and take away another good river that was on trajectory.
So that's an interesting light touch, Shane, to bring us into another question that we got. With COVID-19 and the fact that places have been closed, how do you think that's going to impact the species as a whole?
Well, at least on the Oregon coast, with everything closed down sort of at the end of the season and nobody floating and fishing, it gave the fish a huge opportunity to do their thing undisturbed, you know, especially through the spawning.
Yeah, to follow up on that, how long until we see those fish come back to spawn?
Anywhere from 3 to 5 years, depending on how how many spawn at that time. I mean, the thing is with steelhead is that you have fish. I mean, we start to see fish here entering the rivers in late November, and they come in every day all the way to the middle of April or even the end of April. But then there's certain bigger groups of fish, you know, throughout the season. So depending on the passage during that time, you know, we could definitely see we could definitely see difference. But I think anglers definitely have an impact as far as like catch and release. But I think the greater issues facing the fish, environmental issues, habitat issues, that seems to be a much larger impact on the fish rather than a couple weeks of them not getting you know, caught and released. Because here on the coast where we live, all of our streams are all catch and release for wild steelhead. You can harvest hatchery steelhead, and in fact, it actually may be detrimental because we had, you know, a big chunk of the run where there was hatchery fish that came in that didn't get harvested. So we're actually going to have more hatchery fish spawning with wild fish this year. So it's kind of an interesting scenario. Whether that's going to have an impact or not, it's really hard to say. But I think it's going to be really hard to say what the impact would be, because it kind of goes both ways. Because unfortunately and fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the streams around us have hatchery and wild fish, and in our streams, the hatchery fish are all born from wild parents. So depending on how you look at it, on one side that could be a good thing, the other side it's a bad thing. So we are actually taking wild fish out of the system, spawning those, creating hatchery fish. So the hatchery fish that return at a similar time as wild fish. So we actually probably did have a lot more hatchery fish on the spawning grounds than we normally would, because those fish would have typically been harvested.
Yeah, setting aside some of the broodstock hatchery implications, which we don't have to the same extent in Washington. You know, most of our hatchery programs are segregated. There's a few exceptions, including some of the ones on the Quinault Nation and in the Grays Harbor Basin. But setting aside that, I would say that's really similar to what we're seeing here in Washington. I mean, there's definitely some value to be had from the fact that we had a poor return this year. You know, you saw the Skagit closed, the Chehalis Basin closed. That's most likely related to the blob several years back. It's good to give those fish a break, and it's good that they got a break. But generally, the biggest issues we see are ones that need more momentum. They need more energy. They need more advocacy. I mean, I have sat in committee meetings with legislators, lobbying trips to Olympia and DC, where people just don't even have this on their radar. I mean, not even the senator or the representative, but their staff, who maybe loves to go hiking on weekends, doesn't even know what a steelhead is. And I'm definitely concerned more about the loss of energy and community and advocacy for fish that could occur, both in terms of the short-term closures and the long-term implications of the pandemic, than I am the value that did come from a short closure. I think that's the biggest thing that we need as a community, is to rally around these fish and get more attention driven their way. And if the pandemic is something that takes away from that, the end is not a positive.
Well, and building on that too, Chase, I mean, and you can elaborate more eloquently on this, but with the funding shortages the state of Washington is already seeing for fisheries management, the budgetary problems that are going to come down the pipe in Washington are huge. And I don't know if you want to talk just quickly, even just about like the enforcement side of that, which I think is a pretty fascinating story for the OP, but that coupled with just the money that WDFW is going to have to manage our fisheries moving forward is going to be a real challenge. That's going to be a byproduct of COVID.
And I'm sure it's going to be every state. The Wild Steelhead Coalition and a whole host of other conservation and outdoor recreation groups in Washington state have been working to restore funding levels for our natural resource agencies. They received a really across the board cuts back in 2008 that were never rectified. And we had been working for years and lobbying really hard to try to bring those levels back up even to 2008 levels. And we were successful in March of this year, finally getting more resources and funding allocated to things like the Skagit River fishery that had just been reopened and was the previous year. It was really iconic, draws anglers from around the country. Things like enforcement on the Olympic Peninsula, where Wild Steelhead Coalition literally had to buy a raft and some waders and trail cameras for those enforcement officers because they did not have funding from our state capital to do their damn jobs. We stepped in and tried to fill that gap along with a lot of other organizations that were supporting them. So we were able to finally get that funding push over the finish line in March. It's a big success, and you guys all know what has happened since. We're looking at it, I think, I was looking at some of the numbers today. They're going to be asked to make a $12.6 million cut across the board right now. Probably more cuts to come this summer when our state legislature calls a special session. I'm sure that other states like Oregon and California are going to be facing similar stuff. There is some lifelines potentially coming down the road as far as future stimulus packages. Things like the Recovering America's Wildlife Act that's making its way through DC would be a huge help to try to get some more funding in to apply to state wildlife action plans, of which there are several for steelhead. But really all that work, using the Washington example, all that work that we've been doing to try to get more resources for steelhead, for fisheries enforcement, all that's up in limbo right now due to the pandemic.
Yeah,
Well,
thanks.
And I feel like the point that you're making about people not understanding what's happening in your fishery is something that we have seen in all of these episodes. We talked about it Tuesday. It's the same thing that you feel like you're in a bubble or a vacuum in your area, and you're talking about this stuff to the same folks, and you're beating your head against the same brick walls. And that's one thing that we hope to really achieve with this stuff is this is the beginning for us. Like, this is our idea is that this is the start of something much bigger, much more national in focus, so that we can get all the horses pulling the same wagon instead of all of us pulling our own tiny little wagons, and to me, I think just about angler awareness, is something that is huge whenever you have, because a lot of times it takes someone going to an area to fish for something in order to be passionate about it. But I do believe that through people like Shane and others who are telling these stories, that if we can get enough people to see the passion that you have, through events like this and other things, people will some of that will rub off. And I think that there is opportunity there in order to build, this larger coalition of folks who are caring about all things conservation instead of all things that affect their fishery. And I mean, we're all spread thin. Anyone who does this understands that you're taking an ass whipping every chance you get. But I truly believe that if Chase and I, put our backs against each other so our heads didn't get in the mud like Forrest Gump, that together, I think we can make a huge difference. And so if we get enough of us working in the same direction and enough of us talking about, things that we can control in our fisheries, I think that's where you're going to start to see that passion become, something you can't ignore, and something that will bleed through into DC, will bleed through into your state capitals. And then people will start to try and make a difference. And call me the fly fishing optimist of advocacy, I don't care. But I do think that we have a chance to kick some ass and take some names together. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do with this is say, hey, you know what? We're not alone. We weren't ever alone. We just didn't know about it. And now today with technology and other opportunities, we aren't alone. And we shouldn't ever consider ourselves that way again. And you help me and I help you. And before you know it, I think we're all pushing in the same direction. So
Yeah,
That's just, go ahead.
Yeah. No, sorry to interrupt. I was going to say that's real well said, Lucas. And I think that's a perfect opportunity for folks just to, we're coming up on an hour here. We're definitely going to answer all the questions, but we've had a few folks ask some questions along the lines of what can they do from their couches to help. And I know we have a lot of things going on right now, in Washington, Shane, with the Chehalis project. And I know there's a lot of stuff going down in Oregon as well. And so, if you guys could just go around the horn and kind of just give a quick to-do for what folks can be doing from their couch right now to be supporting wild steelhead, that'd be great.
Shane, why don't you kick it off?
Oh, thanks.
I was turning it over to Kata, but we can Shane can go.
I think it's really important in conservation to, to pick a place that you really care about and learn that place and learn the issues and really get involved, kind of the think global, act local type, mindset. It's really easy to get overwhelmed in the conservation movement because there is forest policy and managing dams and rivers and fisheries management. I mean, it's all so overwhelming. So I would say, drill down on a place that's really special to you, learn a lot about it, and I'm sure there's probably something wrong with it to fix right now. So, learn who's working on those issues and support them and lend your voice. For example, we're the Chehalis Dam project we're working on here in Washington. We got our virtual world premiere coming up Sunday at 7 p.m. on Pacific Rivers TV. So tune in for sure. Prime example, there's a public comment going on right now until May 27th. All you got to do is hit the button and lend your voice because, it's a privilege to be able to spend time and fish for these fish on these rivers in this day and age. And I really feel like it's every angler's responsibility, at the very least, to send a message to the people that make the decisions. Because a lot of these are just pure management decisions or pure policy decisions. And these politicians listen to their constituents. So it really does, every voice really does matter. So figure out what's going on in your watershed, something you care about, and follow through with it and lend your voice. Sometimes it's as easy as an email or a phone call away.
I want to echo what Shane said, that it's so important just to use your voice. So the squeaky wheel gets the grease. They're listening to the people. And I think if most anglers have signed up for everybody's newsletter, right? Like American Rivers, Wild Steelhead Coalition, Wild Salmon Center, Pacific Rivers. And so you get all of these, Save Bristol Bay, all of these things. And you get emails literally every day saying, sign this petition. And at some point you feel like, this is a joke. Like, is anybody listening to me? But it's so important to take action, hit the button. And if you have just a minute to even write one sentence that says, this is important to me, along with the scripted email that's already made up by the group, even just one sentence says, this is important to me. I live here. Whatever that is, it's just taking that action makes a huge difference. And I think that a lot of people don't get that positive reinforcement. Like they get the email said, thanks for taking action, but they don't really get the why, what did that do? And so please.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you, Kate, or Shane anymore. And the fact that I spend quite a bit of time in Washington, D.C., when these letters get sent in, emails get sent in, we hear about it from elected officials that, this is a concern. We appreciate your outreach on this. And, they're not just blowing smoke. They actually listen. So if you have an issue in your, local state, your local watershed, whether if it's state, national, take the time and make your voice be heard because it matters.
Yeah, and I would say, the point of conservation on the couch, what you can do if you've got extra time, and Kate referenced this, is like the bot thing is easy. You can just press it and it happens, but it's really even more effective when you personalize it and you write something and say, this is why it's important to you. And I'll just leave you with this. As somebody that likes to have fun on social media, I can post a picture of, on President's Day, of George Washington crossing the Potomac catching a shad, and it gets 1.2 million likes. And then I put something up, hey, take action on this, and it gets like 300. It's like, like if we could get the same kind of commitment to people like pressing a button or liking something that in the conservation world as they do with silly memes and all of that kind of stuff, it would be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think that's all really well said. And you guys, I think you hit the nail on the head in the importance of grassroots advocacy. So I'm going to go a slightly different track, which is, I've been doing conservation work for a little over 10 years. I cannot count the number of individual campaigns I've worked on. It can get exhausting. So one of the things that I think is critically important is if you have the opportunity, it could be on social media, it could be at the boat ramp, talk to your fellow anglers. I mean, listen and set your bias and your judgment aside. I mean, not only might you learn a thing or two from the guy pulling plugs about where steelhead lie, but at the end of the day, we're chasing the same thing. And if we can't stand side to side or back to back, as Lucas put it, we're going to lose. We need to be able to look at this resource, set aside our individual biases, and find a path forward. And that's true in working with the tribal co-managers. It's true when working with in terms of land management and people that maybe don't give a damn about steelhead, but are building a house on the river that impacts steelhead. We're facing an uncertain future. And as we've all said, we haven't lost the opportunity to turn that future around. But if we're going to make a difference, we need to be able to break down some of these silos and build up some of these bridges so that we can move forward together. So right now, for one example, there's a management portfolio that was released this week for Puget Sound steelhead. It actually includes some new fisheries that would be reopened, which would be huge. This was the product of more than 3 years of collaborative work where folks from Wild Steelhead Coalition to some of these local scrappy, gear fishing groups like Wildcat Steelheaders to Trout Unlimited sat in a room, left their differences at the door, and hashed out a product that is really solid. I mean, it is a blueprint for what steelhead fishing and fisheries management looks like in the Puget Sound region for a decade or more to come. We need more products like that, and we need the political will to implement them. And to do that, it means taking action on each of those campaigns, but it also means reaching out and breaking down some of these divides in our community.
And that's something that I talked about, and I think in the last episode was how, sometimes you just need to put yourself in someone else's shoes for just a minute and say, you know what, at the end of the day, we're all chasing a fish and we all want the opportunity to catch a fish. What happens after that moment may be different. You may want to take it home, you may want to let it go. But the reality is that we're all working off the same pie, I think is the way that I said it. And so the idea of coming to an interaction with someone else with your own biases that don't give you an opportunity to be open-minded enough to have a conversation, guess what? You just put yourself at a disadvantage because you never know when you're going to be able to work with that person to make a difference. And that's something that, to answer Jack's question earlier, it's about sometimes stop being a goddamn fly fisherman or whatever you are for just a second and just be a human who's trying to have an experience on this planet and think about it from that perspective. Because we all get so deep in our own stuff sometimes that it's hard to look past it and to realize like, hey, we're all angling for the same thing. We're all shooting for the same direction. I may come at it slightly different, but the reality is that experience and the enjoyment I take from it is human. That experience doesn't change whether I take the fish home or I throw it back. It's still human to enjoy. And sometimes I think we just have to look at it at that level and stop trying to think about it in such a nuanced way that it gives everybody an opportunity to work from the same perspective.
Yeah, with steelhead, we can still disagree about hatcheries. We can still disagree about harvest. But if we can't start to agree on habitat, on climate, on dams, some of these meta issues, that hatchery isn't going to make a difference.
Yeah, and money helps too. Yeah, it's always, it's a fallback, it's an easy one, but if you can support any of these organizations, you can find us. We'll have ways that you can get a hold of Wild Steelhead Coalition, Pacific Rivers, you mentioned them, financial support. So the groups that are kind of doing the, in the trenches and walking the halls of Congress and doing all that kind of stuff. Financial support's always a good option as well. Yeah.
Well, and these organizations aren't above the same issues that we're all facing with COVID, right? So that's another issue that we're all going to be facing for people who are working on this stuff is that budgets are getting tight and people aren't going to have the capacity to to do what they were doing. And yet the world keeps turning. So not having those sentinels at the gate is going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, I think along those lines, Lucas, I mean, now more than ever, I mean, I was talking with a buddy the other night around the campfire that does a lot of conservation work here in Oregon. And, Oregon, through Oregon lottery dollars, there's a lot of money raised for conservation. Well, 70% of all Oregon lottery is done by video poker in restaurants. Yeah. So that hasn't happened in the last, whatever months, and that's not going to continue to happen. So he said his whole summer of field work and construction work doing restoration projects has been totally slashed. So I think more, now than ever, individuals that can just step up, and granted, we're all feeling this, but whatever that means, a little bit here and there, pass on the word, because especially on a conservation, project side, it is going to, things are really buckling down, and some of the big donors are really going to be, struggling to make things work.
Yeah, and I just we're going to send a follow-up email to everybody with some specific, links and things like that to some of these action alerts. But I just threw a few up in the chat. One to Shane's film premiere on Sunday night. So please watch that. It's an awesome film. Shane's been working his butt off for the last 2+ years on that film. It gives you a great overview of the Chehalis campaign. Also a link to the Chehalis action alert that we referenced earlier here too. That's going to be a hugely important fight as we work to try to not only protect wild fish in this area, but also make sure that we're doing proper flood mitigation and flood resilience in the basin. And then also a shirt that we released recently too. All the funds from that purchase of that are going to go towards supporting the Chehalis River Alliance in that campaign. So you can look good and do good with that shirt. So we'll put some more stuff in a follow-up email to you guys, but those are a few things here. And I know we still have a lot more questions to get to, but just wanted to highlight those real quickly.
I see Justin laughing. He just saw we were looking for fine beard grooming tips.
Young Jack. So clever.
Let's see here. One question that we got earlier that I think is super important. This is from Mike Mancuso. Big part of the problem is that people, anglers and non-anglers, don't know what steelhead are beyond seeing a steelhead fillet at Costco.
Ooh.
And how does that change?
We need to change the marketing, because those really aren't steelhead. They're right up like Roosevelt. So maybe we need to, sue them for copyright infringement on wild steelhead.
Yeah.
Well, something that I was thinking about earlier, and this sort of kind of lends itself to what Shane was saying and kind of what we all have been saying, and something that I think is inherently an issue in our industry is that I feel like the level of pissed offedness, to make up a word, is directly correlated to how long you've been doing this. So if you were a kid growing up and you were kicking ass with 10 steelhead a day, and now it's 1 every 5 trips, you're pissed because you know what it used to be and you're no longer getting to experience that. And one of the things that's happening is that because our industry is growing and more people are getting into fly fishing, their starting point is so decimated to begin with that they don't understand what they're missing out on. And so maybe their passion isn't the same for what they've lost. And so I'm wondering if there's more opportunity for, a more national campaign around saying, hey, this is what it was. And this could be for anything, not just steelhead, but this is what it was. This is what it is now. Let's get it halfway there. Like you were saying, Chase, if you're at 2%, going to 50 would be amazing, right? Like that would be a heck of a start. And so
even 10%.
We'd be good at 10%.
Even 10%.
5.
Yeah. So anyway, let's just.
All right. So Shane, there's your next movie. Yesterday's Fish. Instead of tomorrow's fish. Yesterday's fish.
Yeah, we ran, Wild Steelhead Coalition ran a Steelhead Country campaign a couple of years ago, and maybe just in terms of timing, that it really looked back at, it was a series of films that kind of laid out exactly that trajectory. What we had, what we've lost. It featured people that were there then and are here now, and we walked through that whole thing. And Shane actually helped us put that all together. And that whole, you kind of look at that, like, how do you put all of that, how do you coalesce all of that into one kind of overarching message. It's tough, you know. Those are the, and I think some people sometimes is like, oh, well, I remember the good old days, you know. But I think people sometimes maybe tune that out a little bit occasionally, but
Right.
yeah.
So here's the next prickly question.
Uh-oh.
Oh God,
Yeah.
here we go again.
So, you know, someone who grew up in New England, and I saw the boom and bust of striped bass fishing like Brian did. Let's talk about dams. How have dams impacted steelhead and salmon?
Okay.
And I mean,
It's not that prickly, actually.
Oh, yeah.
I was getting nervous for something way worse than that.
No. I mean, I think we all inherently know that they have been, you know, tremendously impacting wild fish populations, whether if it's steelhead, salmon, whatever, you know, fish it may be, whether if it's in the Pacific Northwest or, you know, the Northeast. Dams obviously contribute to collapses in populations.
Yeah, I guess my thought on dams, just off the top of my head, obviously, yeah, they've been incredibly damaging. But if you look at that kind of the good news stories and the resilient stories, like there's probably been more progress in that respect in terms of dams coming out. I mean, if you look at the success on the Elwha, you look at what's happening on the Klamath right now. Some news just popped yesterday about the eel and the dam. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, they've been. You know, there are, I think you look at, you know, the lower four Snake River dams in the Columbia Basin. I mean, that's a super hot spot. You know, that's a politically contentious thing. But, you know, that aside, and I mean, bottom line is those dams should come out too. Like if you really wanted to make a big difference, you know, across a lot of stuff, those tend to be a little bit of a, you know, a hot button issue. But, you know, it's the 4-H's. I mean, hydro is a piece of that. And they all, the death of 1,000 slices, we've heard all of that. It's habitat, harvest, hatcheries. You know, in terms of percentage, I mean, dams, I think in terms of the relationship, and we've tried to address that. And if you watch Artificial, or you look at how we have tried to manage the impact of those dams, there's been a, lack of a better term, a downstream effect of all of that as well. So it's, yeah, it's a giant hairball to some extent.
And you see, particularly on the Columbian snake, where those dams exacerbate all the other issues that salmon and steelhead are facing. Predation from invasive species like bass and walleye, increasing water temperatures, the more amount of time they need to get in and out of the river. Everything that steelhead are facing today is made worse by dams. And I think, you know, Brian, you're exactly right. There are some stories of optimism to look at. The Nooksack is the one I brought up, where there's a dam that's about to come out. There's even talk of bringing out a dam on the Green River, which flows into the Duwamish, which flows through the city of Seattle, which yet still has a relatively strong run of steelhead that might be a candidate for a fishery in a few years. So it's not all doom and gloom. But when it comes to things like the Columbian snake or the Chehalis proposal, you're looking at a really tightly tied knot of economics, politics, society, that until we start to chip away on the edges a little bit, maybe even making some reasonable compromise with the decision makers over those projects, it's going to be hard to bring those dams out.
I mean, Shane, do you want to talk quickly about your Klamath project?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start at the beginning. I don't think there's been a single thing that has affected steelhead more than dams, all the way from California up Columbia snake system. You know, for example, especially for summer run steelhead, a lot of those big high head dams in the Sierra completely cut off summer steelhead. They extirpated the species. But what is trapped up above those dams is the same thing that was trapped up above the Elwha, are the genetics, that GREB1L gene I was talking about earlier, the summer steelhead gene that can resume anadromy. So there's a tremendous amount of hope in that there's this like essentially genetic gene bank locked up above these dams all across the West. And once there's fish passage available, we can expect those populations of rainbow trout above all those dams to re-express their anadromy. Case in point, Eel River, they just did a big study down there on the rainbow trout populations, and sure enough, on the ancient summer steelhead GREB1L gene in the headwaters of the Eel River. It's something we'd all speculated for years. Were there summer runs in there? Because currently the only summer runs in the eel are in the Middle Fork, which is the most southern population in existence left. So what's up above the dam would make that the most southern population of summer steelhead. Tremendous amount of opportunity, even though the adult summer steelhead have been extirpated above all these dams. North Fork of the Clearwater, Dvorak Dam wiped out the greatest steelhead race of all time, 40-pound summer run steelhead. Just incredible stuff has been lost, but the genetics aren't lost. They're still there. So there is a hope. So I hope in my lifetime we can see fish passage or a lot of these dams come down. Being ready to do the official Klamath Dam removal documentary. It's going to be my biggest project ever for the next 5 years. And I expect we're going to see an incredible rebound of steelhead. I think that is going to be the flagship species of Klamath restoration, just as we're seeing in the Elwha, because such a tremendous population of micas and rainbow trout above those dams. So yet at the same time, we've got all these great dam removal stories and hope. And here we are in Washington fighting a new dam on our largest wild steelhead run we have left. So you can't let your guard down either. You got to have hope, but you got to keep fighting.
That's right.
Yeah.
Cautiously
On
optimistic.
that note, it's so worth saying to anybody that's listening, like, the Chehalis Dam is something that any angler can get involved with by raising their voice, that in today's day and age, we shouldn't be building a dam. We should be tearing them down. That's why they're being torn down on, like, the Klamath and other places like the Elwha.
Yeah, it's shocking.
A good friend of mine worked for the company that took down the Elwha Dam,
Oh, awesome.
based here in Bozeman.
Some of these dam conversations, it can be really constructive and inspiring. I mean, I've been on the listserv around Snake River Dam removal for years, and you see commercial fishermen, you see tribes, you see gear anglers, guys that run their jet sled up the Clearwater to guys that are swinging flies below Heller Bar. Everybody is relatively on the same page. I mean, to have, I don't know if any of you guys knew Buzz Ramsey is. He's a really high-profile bait advocate, gear advocate. To have him place an op-ed in the local Tri-City paper advocating for dam removal, I mean, that's the kind of bridge building that our community is going to need to move some of these big issues forward. And you're seeing that in the Chehalis as well. The Quinault Nation coming out in their opposition a few weeks ago. Shane doing good work to rally local fishermen against the proposal. Groups like Conservation Northwest that are looking at it from a terrestrial wildlife angle and habitat connectivity angle and land management angle. You do have these issues that bring people together. And I think what you saw in the Elwha is it took 30 years, but it was successful. And we can have that same success on the Chehalis. And I am truly confident that we will have that success on the Snake. It might take another 10, 20 years, but we'll get there. But we need these issues that build coalitions, that broaden our tent. If we get stuck from campaign to campaign, just looking at the trees but not the forest, we will lose.
I think, dams have a finite life, and we're kind of, a lot of these dams that were built in the early 1900s, they're approaching the end of their life now, like what we're seeing in the headwaters of the Eel River. So, I think there is going to be a lot more opportunity for dam removal in the near future. And it really is up to the angling community to support that, because it is very political. It's moving away from a manifest destiny ideal of the West, and how do we redefine, that ideal and that vision of how we live here in the West. So we all have to be engaged, and there's a lot of great hope for the future.
Well, and something that I just sort of had oh, sorry, Kate, go ahead.
Oh, that was really well put, Shane.
Yeah.
Like,
Beautiful.
how do we reimagine how we view the West? Like, kind of scrapping manifest destiny. I think that's one thing that always pisses me off when I'm on the rivers. Like how did they not leave one big tree for all of us to enjoy, or 10, but they took them all, right? Like, that always just blows my mind and frustrates me. But that was such a great way to put it. And yeah, actually, you should repeat yourself, because it was beautifully said.
We are in the 21st century. I mean, if we're looking to put people on Mars, we should be able to figure out the water crisis without, irrigation canals, everything evaporates. I mean, we waste so much of our natural resources, whether it's timber or water or fish or whatever. I mean, how about like, let's just reinvent the whole system. And
Yeah.
management's always so slow to catch up. You know, a lot of these problems that we're facing are just rooted in just ancient management locked into, you know, how they started working on this, you know, whether it's fisheries, forest, or river management 40 years into the, you know, 40 years later at the end of their career, they're just like, they're ready to retire and they don't want to change. So now it's kind of like we need to change the management paradigm as well as the philosophy of how we manage our landscape, public lands, and natural resources.
And that's
Yeah, and we'd be remiss probably not to mention the hatchery component of that dam piece of it. And the fact that, you know, here we are, we're focused on restoring wild rivers and taking dams out, and then we kind of backfill it with adding a hatchery, like on the Elwha and the proposal on the Klamath. And, you know, the science is there, and it's like global climate change and debate about whether, you know, the science around hatcheries and all those things, and they certainly have an impact. But, you know, as we look to restore wild runs of fish, you know, we have to be looking at creating those refuges that are exclusively for wild fish and don't have to rely on hatchery supplementation. There may be places where those things are necessary to continue angling opportunity, but, you know, having still wild fish refuges and thermal refuges for fish, you know, I mean, my feeling has been that, you know, that kind of mindset has had its way for the last, I don't know how many years. It's been decades and decades of that. And my question is like, well, you know, where's my wild fish? Where's my wild river? And that's important to me. And so, and I think that we can come to that common ground that Chase is talking about around those issues, and it doesn't have to be so black and white anymore.
Yeah, you nailed it, man. I think it's so important that when we look at the future of wild steelhead and steelhead fisheries in general, you know, frankly, we're going to have a balance. Hatcheries are not going away tomorrow. You look at that hatchery proposal on the Elwha. You know, I feel lucky to have done some work with and for the tribes, and they feel like they fought their asses off for a century to preserve their fishing rights. They're not going to wait another century to keep fishing. Now, I'm not going to defend or advance that position myself, but that's where they're coming from. Those are allies on habitat. They're allies in terms of land management, forest restoration, so many other things that salmon and steelhead depend on. We're going to have to pick our battles. And you look at a place like the Skagit or that Puget Sound portfolio that I mentioned, there are wild rivers, and there are rivers that are managed a little bit differently for various reasons, whether that's recreational fisheries, tribal fisheries, just the reality that the wild fish are probably not going to come back in certain systems. But just as much as that's part of the portfolio, the Skagit's in there. Places like the Sole Duck, where we took out a hatchery and we've had one of the strongest fisheries on the West Coast ever since. You have to have that balance, and part of reaching that balance is putting some of those leaving your swords at the door a little bit when it comes to hatcheries.
well, and there's a possibility that more people are going to become interested in something like a hatchery with our president's latest executive order. So it might start get a little bit of traction there as far as people understanding what's going on. So
That's aquaculture. That's a little different.
We could talk about fish farms all night.
Same company.
Yeah, exactly.
Same company.
Ideally, we wouldn't need any of it. Seriously.
Agreed. Two things that I wanted to mention. One is that we're coming up on an hour and a half, which is awesome, and a lot of people have stuck around. Every time we start these, I think we're going to finish in an hour, and it ends up being an hour and a half, but that's good. I mean, I think we've had lots to talk about. One thing that I think is really interesting is that I wonder if there's a correlation between the fact that you can see a dam and it's in your face, and that makes it something that all people can agree upon, and that maybe that lends itself to us making more things obvious. You know, maybe it's sometimes as easy as something that's physically in your face that makes you want to get rid of it. It's truly an obstacle. It's something you can physically see. And so maybe there's something there as we move forward and trying to make some of these other things we're facing into an obstacle, something that people can see and agree upon. The other thing that I've always wondered, how do I connect Magnuson-Stevens to Steelhead? You just told me how. Because one of the things that make Magnuson so cool is that it's updated every 10 years because they realized that things are going to change in management over time. And that if you don't have that updating system there, there's no way that you're going to be able to manage something the same way you did 40 years ago. And so you talking about the fact that they haven't updated management in some time tells me that that's how you make the connection between something like Magnuson that gets gets reauthorized because people realize that things change, and some of the other management systems that have stayed the same. So I want to appreciate that from what y'all have done for me, is because I had like a little light bulb go off and say, oh, hey, that's where someone in Washington State might care about something like Magnuson, because guess what? You know, the federal government realizes that you can't do something the same way forever and expect it to be applicable the entire time. So thank y'all. Thank y'all for that. I learned nothing else about Steelhead, just so you know, nothing else. Well, this feels like a good spot if we're good.
Well, does anybody have any final thoughts or anything? I don't know if anybody has any last words here to.
Well, I just one thing. One last comment came in. I don't think we have time to address it. We've run our course, but it's how do some of this stuff's not going to be able to happen enough, and how do you get people that don't believe in wild fish to kind of rally around those issues? And I think that's going to be stuff for future. If conservation from the couch lives on beyond this, we can do dedicated episodes around specific issues and bring experts on to have those discussions and hopefully build continuing consensus, whether it's steelhead or redfish, striped bass, and on Tuesday night we're going to be talking about bonefish and tarpon. So I hope that this is a beginning of some of these conversations, and as somebody that's been involved in this in a while and been frustrated with some of it, the opportunity to be able to build coalitions like this is optimistic to me. It feels good. So I appreciate it. And to quote the great Groucho Marx, I never want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member. I'm pretty stoked to be part of this club. So thanks. I want to thank everybody for joining in and taking the time out. So,
yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, y'all.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah,
Thanks
and
for
one
taking
final
the time.
thing. Yeah, so
I'm just going to mention something quickly.
yeah,
The fact that we're going through all this right now in COVID, and we got guides on
Oh,
here
yeah.
on multiple
Yeah,
conversations,
exactly.
and retailers on multiple conversations. Visit your local fly shop.
Yeah.
Spend some money with them. Go to your book a trip, and if you can, spend some money to support them, because our industry right now is just being.
Got some geese back there, bud.
And of course, Tag Kleiner says, "Buy a Sage rod."
Right. He's always talking about AFTA not being specific to a brand, and then Tag jumps out with buy a Sage rod.
Yeah. So, but no, honestly, if you can, go to your local retailer. Flies, tippet, leader, new waders, new boots, whatever it may be. But if you can, go to your local fly shop. The local fly shop is your information source. It's your hub. It's our people. So if you can, support them as much as you can.
Yeah, I talked to somebody who works with more than 50 plus outdoor specialty retailers, and their number in April was off 70%. So they could use all the help you can give them right now.
Well, I'll tell you, if you want to catch a steelhead, you got to book a trip with Kate and Justin. There's some fishy people I know for sure.
Totally. Absolutely. Book it now. Book it now.
Yeah, this is steelhead related, but there's 24 hours to comment to President Trump on Save Bristol Bay and protecting Bristol Bay from the pedal mine, and that's a really important issue. And you can go online and take action at savebristolbay.com or defendbristlebay.org. And also, I owe Alex and Jay Michelle a picture of the dogs, but they're dead asleep.
I was just going to add, after you spend those dollars at your local fly shop, consider pitching in to your small nonprofit working on fish, working on conservation. I can speak for groups like Wild Steelhead Coalition, Conservation Northwest. I mean, there's so many others out there. Native Fish Society. I saw Jay Michelle on the chat. We're doing okay right now, but what it looks like in 6 months is totally uncertain. And, these fights are not going to go away. They're only going to get more difficult, particularly under the current administration. Some of the things are trying to slip through. We're going to need your support. And it might be now, it might be in 3 to 6 months when things start to get a little bit more dire, but think about what a good contribution is for you, because I can tell you that it's going to make a huge difference, particularly with the future that we have ahead of us.
Yeah, for sure. And then, we're going to post this on our website at after.org, and I think Moldy Chum is going to post it as well on your website.
Yeah.
So spread the wealth, spread it to your friends, and let us know if there's any other questions, and we'll try to field them to everybody that we possibly.
And join us on Tuesday for boat fishing tarpon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to Florida.
Yes, we are. All right.
Yep.
Sounds pretty good right now.
Right.
It's
All
awesome.
right.
Well, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you all taking the time, everybody who's joining in, to all our panelists,
Great to
Kate,
see
Justin,
you.
Chase, Lucas, Shane. Thank you so much. Really
Yeah,
appreciate
thank
it.
you all.
Yeah. Cheers.
Appreciate y'all very much.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Late.